Hello, we're going to be looking at chapter 12 of Maurizio's Classical Mythology and Context. This will look specifically at quest heroes. These are heroes who are traveling on some sort of mission. The focus will be primarily on Odysseus and the Odyssey. Of course, his mission is to get home. So here we have the the layout. We're going to see the Aeneid again because Aeneas also is a traveling hero in part of the story. So on the homecoming husband, so we've got Odysseus, Jason, and Oedipus. All three of these heroes, in a sense, want to get home. Now, Odysseus finally gets home after 20 years away at the Trojan War. He's away at the war for 10 years. It takes him 10 years more to get back. Jason has to go to get the Golden Fleece. He's supposed to do that so he can come back and get his kingdom, but because he's involved because of what Medea does in the death of the current king, who his uncle, who got the throne by suspicious means, but it doesn't matter. He still was the king, and so since Jason's involved in that, he in fact cannot become king, and then has to travel away to Corinth with Medea. Oedipus is a homecoming figure. He doesn't quite realize that he's coming home. He thinks he's going away from his home in Corinth and going away to Thebes, but in fact Thebes is his real home, but he doesn't know that. And of course there's all sorts of trouble connected with that. The Greek word for a homecoming is nostos, and there was a whole group of epic poems called the Nostoi, which dealt with the homecomings of the Greek heroes at Troy. So there was the most famous one, the one that we have that is clearly the best, is that of Odysseus. But there was one of Agamemnon, there was one of Menelaus, there was one of Diomedes, there was one of Idomeneus, and so forth. But we don't have those. The word nostalgia literally means a pain for going home. And that's the idea, right? When you're feeling nostalgic, you're thinking to your past and thinking, oh, it'd be great if I could only go back there. But of course, in a sense, you can never go back home because you've changed. So when you go back, home is not what it had been. In the Odyssey, the importance of Penelope, Odysseus' wife, is crucial. She has to remain faithful to her husband, or basically her husband is going to have the same fate that happens with Agamemnon. He comes home, his wife had not been faithful, and she and her lover kill him. So that ends up being very important. And there is, the homecoming husband is a tale type. There are several of these stories. Rip Van Winkle to some extent, right? He sleeps and then he wakes up 20 years later. The world has changed. He's still in the same place, but of course, the people he knew have since passed away, and the like. There's a poem by Longfellow called Evangeline, which is also about the husband coming home. And of course, things have changed because he's been away so long. The figure of Odysseus. In the Iliad, Odysseus is contrasted with Achilles. Odysseus is primarily a guy who uses his brain. Now, he is a great warrior, and he might even be able to give Achilles a run for his money. But Achilles does have the edge as far as just pure martial ability. Odysseus knows a few things or two, and that might even things up. But for strategy, long-term strategy, Odysseus is definitely the go-to guy. He is a featured figure in the Iliad. I mean, he appears a couple of times, so he's recognizable. But he is not the main character there. The Iliad is not his story. He appears in the embassy to Achilles in Book 9. So Agamemnon realizes by Book 9 that he was in the wrong, and that taking Achilles' girl away from him, his prize away, was a bad idea, that it's actually hurting the Greeks, and that he shouldn't have done it, that he is actually in the wrong. So he makes an offer, he basically like a ransom offer. He makes an offer to Achilles to get him to come back. He's going to give his girl back. He has not actually slept with her, and he's going to give a bunch of other stuff in addition. So this would be a net gain for Achilles. The correct thing for him to do at this point is probably to take this. He doesn't really believe that Agamemnon's truly sorry, but the point is, in the ancient Greek world, that's not really that important. He has taken the steps publicly to actually apologize, and so that can be taken at face value even if you don't really believe it. And anyway, he does not do that. Odysseus is the one who has to give Achilles that message of the offer. Now, the interesting thing is Agamemnon, in about a speech of maybe 40 lines, goes through like all the stuff he's going to give Achilles. And then he ends this statement and tell him that I'm the leader and he needs to obey me, so he needs to get back to the army. Odysseus repeats Agamemnon's speech to him verbatim, but he leaves out the whole part about where Agamemnon says, and remember, I'm the king and he should obey me. Because he realizes that's going to get nowhere with Achilles. It's just going to send him further into a rage, and he doesn't want any part in that. Homer doesn't tell us that, but that is the way it's set up. And because oral literature often has verbatim repetition, it is actually the Agamemnon speech and the Odysseus recounting of Agamemnon's speech are verbatim, except that he's cut like the last 7 or 8 lines long, the part where Agamemnon was asking Odysseus to read the riot act to Achilles. Odysseus is, his type of heroics is sometimes called passive heroics. This doesn't mean that he is a passive person. What it means is that he endures. So Achilles is not a passive hero. He is not someone who takes it. You insult him, there's going to be a fight. I mean, he's just simply not going to take it. Odysseus will look at the situation first to determine, is this the time to actually do payback, or do we wait? And so when he goes back to Ithaca, he disguises himself, and he's disguised as a beggar, and for I don't know, a week or a couple of weeks, he's there in disguise, and he's basically treated like crap by most of the people in Ithaca, not by his son, who initially doesn't recognize him, but is gracious anyways. But then he does realize that it's his dad, and some faithful servants who do not treat guests, no matter how poor they are, badly. So, but most of the people do, and he just takes it, right? Achilles wouldn't take it, right? He'd get kicked by a guy, that guy would be dead, right? So that's a big difference. And in the Odyssey, there are also stories told about Odysseus where he went in disguise into Troy, where he was risking his life to get information. That again is not something that Achilles would have done. He might have stormed into Troy. He wasn't going to go into disguise. I don't think, my personal feeling is that the author of the Odyssey does not see Odysseus as having divine lineage. Some people think he is descended from Hermes, Hermes is a great-grandfather. His maternal grandfather, Odysseus' maternal grandfather, was a man named Autolycus. Autolycus was primarily known for a cattle raid, and in some accounts he is the son of I don't think Homer or the author of the Odyssey, that whoever that Homer is, believes that story, because Odysseus meets Hermes in Book 10. Hermes, there's no reference to them being related, even like great-great-grandfather. There's no reference to that. And so that makes me think, yeah, he doesn't really, that's not part of his sense of who Odysseus is. Odysseus was marked by a scar when he went on a boar hunt as a boy, like of about 12. And that left a deep scar in his inner thigh. So he basically has this big gash. That scar is something that his nurse, the woman who had raised him from childhood, she had tended to that, and at one point when he's in disguise as the beggar, she sees the scar, realizes who he is. So it's sort of an identifying mark. Here we have Eurycleia, that nurse. You can see her kneeling. Her head's gone, but you can see her kneeling. Presumably that's Telemachus, the son, standing up, and Penelope standing behind, and then there's Odysseus. But the fact that we have here a serving woman basically washing his feet, and this is clearly that scene, even though this is fragmentary. And this looks like it's a terracotta plaque. So he is a cunning hero, and one of the epithets used of him is Polymatus, very clever. He also has Polytropos is another epithet, and Polytropos means of many turns. That's used at the very beginning of the poem when he's first introduced in the poem. Muse, tell me about the man of many turns. Now that's a wrestling term, and it basically means some guy who can slip out of wrestling holes. You can't pin him down. But it also sort of applies to Odysseus, because he really is sort of a slippery character. His cunning intelligence defines his character in tragedies, sometimes to the good, sometimes to the bad. The two plays here that are listed, Ajax and Philoctetes, are both by Sophocles. In the Ajax is the big sort of hulking hero, and when after Achilles' death, his armor is supposed to go to the best warrior that the Greeks have. Well, Ajax physically might fit that, but the Greeks ask some of the Trojan prisoners they have which Greek they fear most, and they say Odysseus because of his cleverness, and so he gets the armor. This causes Ajax to go mad. He tries to kill the leaders of the Greek army, so Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, and so forth. But the gods make him look upon a flock of sheep as being the Greek leaders. He kills the sheep, and then is caught, and basically he's going to be executed, but he commits suicide. Right? He dies with some honor. Athena, who has been sort of in the background, shows up in the play, and she basically asks why Odysseus isn't pressing his advantage and really, going after this guy. And Odysseus basically says that he feels sorry for the guy. So in that play, even though he's the clever guy, he also has some compassion. In the Philoctetes, Philoctetes is a guy he's the guy who lit the funeral pyre to help Heracles at the end of his life. Right? So Heracles has been given that shirt or that tunic, and it's got blood on it, and that blood has acid in it, and it also sort of is adhesive, so it sticks to him, and then the acid starts burning to his skin. He builds a funeral pyre and then goes atop it. Well, he needs some help. He gets that help from Philoctetes, this young man, and Heracles gives him his bow. And there's a prophecy that they can't take Troy without that bow. Well, what happened with Philoctetes was going to Troy with the Greek army. but they landed on an island to get refreshments or something, and Philoctetes stepped on a snake. The snake bit him, and the poison of the snake didn't kill Philoctetes, but it also caused this wound in his leg never to heal. So that you've got this sort of pussy oozing wound that is incredibly smelly. And so what the Greek army does, they basically abandon this guy on a deserted island. He's all there by himself. There's food that he can get, so he won't die, but he's left there. And so they need to get the bow. Odysseus goes there with Neoptolemus, Achilles' son. Neoptolemus wants to be honorable about this. He wants to explain the situation to Philoctetes, and he wants to ask him, honestly, for his bow. Odysseus is all about, kid, why don't you just sort of get this guy to like you, and while you guys are talking, we'll basically steal the bow, which Neoptolemus doesn't want to go along with. But again, that's Odysseus. He wants to get the job done. In this particular case, he doesn't see a need to treat Philoctetes with any kindness. And in some other Greek tragedies, he seems to be plotting in a way that will get him glory, but it actually will hurt some of the Greeks. So he's in some plays and some works, he is not a nice person. He's got a skill set. He can plan well. He can think things through. He can also keep quiet when he has to, right? He can be an enduring hero rather than out there fighting. But he does slip up. Now, one time when he slips up is not the Sirens, is the Cyclops. In the Cyclops, he tricks the Cyclops by saying his name's Nobody. And so then when they blind the Cyclops, he and his men, the Cyclops starts yelling, I'm being killed, and then his neighbors come out and say, well, who's killing you, who's beating you up? And then nobody's killing me. Well, if nobody's killing you, then go back to sleep. And then they basically leave him alone. So the trick works. But when they're leaving the Cyclops Isle, Odysseus, like any Greek hero, wants fame, and so he says, hey, Cyclops, I am Odysseus. I'm the guy who blinded you. And of course, that's really not such a hot plan. One is he's shouting, and the Cyclops can still hear, even though he can't see. And his hearing's good enough that he almost sinks the ship with a boulder. And two, the Cyclops is the son of Poseidon, and potentially Poseidon can actually ruin Odysseus' homecoming. Interestingly enough, in the Odyssey, Poseidon has very little to do as far as action goes. In Book 5 of the Odyssey, he does cause a storm to really rattle Odysseus. Odysseus is on a raft. The rest of his crew is all died. He's alone. He's on a raft. And Poseidon basically, he realizes he can't keep Odysseus from getting home, but he wants to make it as painful as possible, and he does so. So why does he do that? Solely because this is the guy who gouged out the eye of his son. With the Sirens, he wants to hear the siren song. He knows that the siren song will cause shipwreck, so he plugs the rest of his crew's ears with wax, and he has himself tied to the main mast very tightly, and not to let go until they are well past where the sirens are. So he gets to hear the song. Odysseus learns a lot from female characters, and in the Odyssey, female characters are, sometimes they are not quite evil, but maybe leaning that way, but they're all very smart, and they're all sort of equal to male characters. Odysseus is superior to them, but just maybe by a little, and of course the other male characters can't measure up to these female characters. So it is sort of interesting, and some people think that might indicate that the author of the Odyssey was in fact a woman, maybe the daughter or the granddaughter of one of these singers. in the Homeric tradition. I don't think that's likely, only because singers had to sing in public, and there's no evidence of women doing that. So that's where I have a problem. Given the nature of the poetry, it doesn't seem to fit. But the fact that there are strong female characters who are presented pretty much positively, it's impressive and noteworthy. So here we have the sirens making music. So they're actually playing musical instruments and not singing a song. But this is what the sirens look like, right? They're part bird and part female. In Book 9, Odysseus encounters Polyphemus the Cyclops. Odysseus' intelligence triumphs over Polyphemus' much greater strength. The Cyclops and their island is like at the edge of civilization. They do not share Greeks' cultural values. In fact, the Cyclops, when Odysseus at one point, asks him to remember the gods, basically the gods of hospitality, the Cyclops basically says, "We don't worship the gods here. Don't invoke the gods to us because it doesn't mean nothing to us." Now this is interesting since his father's a god, but apparently just they're outside the norm. The norm would be that you be respectful to the gods. Here they don't care. There are mutual violations of xenia, of this rule of guest-host relations, hospitality. Xenos means a foreigner, and this is how you're supposed to treat strangers. If someone comes to your house and they're a traveler, you are supposed to show them hospitality, and you offer them a gift, some sort of parting gift. You treat them well while they stay with you. You offer them a parting gift, and then in return, if you ever happen to be in their neck of the woods, they will then show you the same hospitality. Violations of that would be taking stuff, if you're a guest, taking stuff without asking, without it being sort of given to you. For the host, it would be doing anything to the guests, like harming them in some way or killing them. And Odysseus and his men violate Xenia. They come upon the cave of the Cyclops, and there are these gigantic wheels of cheese, and they help themselves to some of that cheese. Now, they weren't given permission to do that. They shouldn't have done that. That is a violation. I would argue that would probably be seen as a minor violation because they were hungry, and their host would ordinarily give them food, so they're taking it. Yeah, it is a little bit premature, but it's not something that would be unheard of. So it is a violation. It's sort of a minor one. The Cyclops, on the other hand, takes two of Odysseus's men, slams them against the wall, kills them, and then eats them raw. Okay, so there's cannibalism, there's all this stuff. That is a major violation of Xenia on the part of the Cyclops. The Odysseus gets the Cyclops drunk. He passes out. They blind him. He's the only one who can lift this gigantic boulder that serves as his door. And so they have to wait till the next day when the Cyclops gets ready to take his sheep out, because he has to, right? If he doesn't let the sheep out into the field, they're going to be crapping in his cave. They're going to be doing all sorts of stuff in his cave. Obviously he doesn't want that. So he's got to let them out. And they use the sheep as a way for the men to sort of sneak out as well. And they all get, except for the ones who were killed and eaten, they all get back to the ship and they escape. Odysseus can be viewed as somewhat less than heroic, but he's also dealing with a monster, and he does what he has to do to win. So, and it is possible that there may be some sense here, because the Cyclops sees Odysseus and his people as maybe being pirates, and so it's possible that the Greeks, in their colonizing in the Mediterranean, were initially seen as potentially pirates. And Odysseus' travels are all over the Mediterranean, just like the Greek colonization was. So here we've got the Cyclops being blinded. The snake up top seems to be just a decoration. Um, they're holding the wine out to him. He's already drunk the wine and he's passed out. But it looks like he's holding legs of someone he had already consumed some of. I mean, maybe this was like going to be a midnight snack or something, but he's holding those legs. Here we have Odysseus hiding under a ram. That's he's the last one to get out of the cave. There is only one big ram left, and he sort of holds onto the belly of it, and you can see the head there between the two front legs. So you have women's words and Odysseus' silence. Well, Odysseus talks quite a bit too, but he does a lot of listening, a lot more than maybe most Greek men. Circe is a witch. She may be a goddess. She is the granddaughter of the sun. Calypso is a goddess. The sirens, of course, are these bird women monsters that sing. Nausicaa is a maybe 13-year-old girl on the island of Phaeacia who is out doing laundry when Odysseus washes up on shore, and she basically gives him some of the clean clothes that he can wear and go in to see her father, who's the king, and then get help on getting home. So Nausicaa is sort of more like the ideal. She is a young woman. She has every right to be afraid. Her girlfriends all run away when they see Odysseus because Odysseus is naked. Right? He's been on the raft gets shattered and so forth, and basically his clothes have been all torn. So he's basically wearing maybe a few rags, but nothing else. So he's basically naked. A naked guy staggering out of the bushes would cause, I think, most people to freak out, and it does for the girls, but not Nausicaa. She's brave. She isn't afraid of him, and she offers help. And then she sort of has a crush on him. I mean, she's a 13-year-old girl. She's at the point where within a year or so she's expected to get married herself, and here's this stranger, right? So Odysseus goes to the underworld in book 11. He's been with Circe through most of book 10, taken a whole year of the return journey with Circe. Then his men say, hey, let's go home. He goes to Circe and she says, yeah, you can go home, but first you got to go to the underworld because you got to get some information from Tiresias. Odysseus is sort of curious. He's also sort of afraid. His men are terrified of the fact that they have to travel to the edge of the world. They don't actually go to the underworld. They don't go underground, just to the edge of the world, but the ghosts sort of pop up there, so he's able to speak with the ghosts. He speaks with his mom, who has died. She died a couple years after Troy was taken, and her son didn't return. And there are other famous women. So there's like this group of famous women that come up and talk to Odysseus. Again, very unusual. Why have this group of women? The mom, that makes some sense. But why all these other women? It seems a little bit strange that he would be spending time talking to the ghosts of women. He also talks to Agamemnon's ghost and Achilles' ghost and some other, I think Heracles' ghost even though the real Heracles is a god on Olympus. He spends 7 years with Calypso, not 8 as it says here. Might be in the 8th year that he goes home. And there he's pretty much a prisoner. He does not have a means of getting away. Calypso wants to have sex with him every single night, so he's basically been Calypso's sex slave. And it's not that the sex with Calypso is terrible. She doesn't unman him, but he misses his home. He wants to go home, and she does agree to let him go because the gods tell her to do so. So here we have Odysseus chasing Circe. I'm guessing that, so up above you can tell you've got some men that are partly turned into animals, and you've got Odysseus with a petasus, that wide-brimmed hat. hanging from his shoulders, and he's got the sword drawn, and there's Circe. And that's what happens in Book 10, right? Hermes gives him a magic potion so that Circe's magic won't work on him, and then he tells Odysseus, now look, she's going to give you this drink. It's got a potion in it. I've basically just given you the antidote. She's going to wait to see if it takes effect. Wait for a moment and then pull your sword and then charge at her. And then, of course, she's going to panic, which is what happens. And then she basically says, look, let's go to bed and, get to know each other better. And Hermes had told him, yes, you really need to do that. But first, make sure she promises not to unman you, which she does do. The second half of the homecoming takes place on Ithaca. In Book 13, he gets home, and then he's basically doing reconnaissance to make sure what's going on, and he's disguised as a beggar. He has a conversation with Penelope. Penelope tells him a dream about a number of swans and so forth, and then he interprets that dream as indicating that Odysseus is going to come home, and he's going to come home soon. She then suggests this bow contest where Odysseus's bow, which was left behind, it is very difficult to string the bow. No one but Odysseus has the power to do it. I mean, Achilles could do it, but no one less than Achilles or Odysseus could do it. And so anyone who can do that person then is on the fast track to marry Penelope. It is unclear when Penelope knows that the person talking to her is her husband, but I suspect it is before the bow contest suggestion is made. If she doesn't know that, she's taking an awful risk, because if one of the suitors happens to be able to do that, she would then have to marry that suitor. After they have the bow contest, Odysseus wins the contest. He's in disguise, but he wins the contest. He then starts killing the suitors, because the suitors have been living at his home for 3 years. They've been abusing hospitality as guests. They've been treating Telemachus, his son, and Penelope to some extent with not great respect, which again is not something that guests are supposed to do. They are not welcome, and they have been asked to leave, and they have refused. Again, that is not good guest behavior. And so Odysseus has some rights here to actually do what he does, but it's still pretty brutal. I mean, he wipes out something like 50 suitors and kills them. And then he has the slave girls who had been sleeping with the suitors. He has them come into the hall, clean the hall, and then he hangs them. So it is sort of a brutal scene. They may have punishment coming, but it does seem like this is a bit too far. At that point, Odysseus has won the contest. He goes to Penelope and basically says, I'm your husband and I've returned. And she says, wait a minute, buddy. I don't know about that. But you've done a favor, you got rid of the suitors, and so what I'm going to recommend that we do is I'll get Odysseus's bed, and I'll bring that out into the hall, and you can sleep here in the hall in Odysseus's bed. It's a nice bed. And at that point, Odysseus blows up and says, who's been messing with my bed? And what we find out is that Odysseus's bed, one of the legs of the bed, is actually a living root, a living trunk of a tree. So it's a tree that was cut down. The house was built around the tree, and that one leg is actually still rooted to the earth. So you can't move the bed without cutting the roots. And that's the proof. That's the absolute proof, because nothing has happened to the bed, but he knows about this, and only Odysseus would know about that. So Book 23, happily ever after, they spend the night together, and they also tell stories to one another about all the stuff that's happened in the time since he left for Troy. So this is a successful return. He is a comic hero. His story has a happy ending. Agamemnon and Menelaus in Greek. So Odysseus, Penelope, and Telemachus versus Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, and Orestes. Agamemnon, of course, is betrayed by his wife, who, with her lover, kills him. Orestes avenges his father, and Telemachus is basically chastised by the goddess Athena in disguise for not being as manly as Orestes, because Orestes took action and avenged his father, and Telemachus is sort of whining about the suitors, and Athena in disguise basically says, why don't you do something about it? You know, I mean, Orestes did stuff about a much worse thing. So, Agamemnon's story gets repeated. It's told by Agamemnon himself. It's told by other people sort of through the course of the poem. It's told by the gods. The gods are telling the story. And one key thing is Odysseus has a faithful wife. Agamemnon had a faithless wife. Agamemnon's return is unsuccessful, and his death is different. In this, he is not killed in the bathtub. He is killed at a banquet that Aegisthus, the lover, he doesn't realize it's her lover, it's his cousin, has a banquet, and in the banquet, he has his men kill Agamemnon's men, and he kills Agamemnon and Cassandra. But it's the same end, even if we don't have exactly the same story. Now, Menelaus does return with his wife, so in a sense that might be seen as a happy ending. But there seems to be some indication that Helen has, drugs at her disposal, and those drugs may be helping her control, a husband who would be just, he would be justified in treating Helen very badly. For what she did, but that we don't see that. So he does have a successful return. It takes him a few years to get home. I think it takes him 7 years instead of 10, but it still takes him a while. Telemachus in book 4 goes to Sparta, talks with Menelaus and Helen. So here we have Orestes killing Clytemnestra, and presumably the figure in the upper right is a Fury because she's holding those snakes. Here we've got Menelaus claiming Helen. I don't know how we know this. There are no markings, but we definitely have a warrior figure taking a bride. Now, Jason is entirely mortal. His parents are mortal. He doesn't have a divine ancestor. He comes home he grows up elsewhere. He comes home, and he loses a sandal in the river when he helps an old woman across the stream. Well, the old woman is Hera in disguise, and because of Jason's kindliness, she basically is determined to be his protector, and Hera is sort of his protector. Pelias is the king, is Jason's uncle, who's taken the throne from his brother, Jason's father. Theoretically, now that Jason has come home, he should get the kingdom, but instead Pelias sends him off after the Golden Fleece. When he returns after the Golden Fleece, Pelias gets killed because of things that Medea does, and as a result, he can't stay there. So it ends up being an unsuccessful homecoming. Things do not go the way they're supposed to for Jason. When he goes to get the Golden Fleece, a man named Argus builds the Argo. Argus, then that name means swift. The ship's name also means swift, which is an appropriate name for a ship, right? If you want to get there quickly. He does that with Athena's help. They go all the way to the far side of the Black Sea, to Colchis, near where modern-day Sochi is, where the Sochi Olympics were held, to get the fleece. King Aeetes, who's Medea's father and the king of Colchis, he basically refuses unless Odysseus can do some impossible tasks. With Medea's help, he manages to do those tasks, manages to get hold of the fleece, and manages to escape. Her brother Absyrtus is kidnapped by the Argonauts, and Medea kills him and chops him up into pieces as they are being pursued by Aeetes. Aeetes then has to slow down the pursuit to pick up the pieces of his son so that he can actually give the son decent burial. Here we've got Jason stealing the golden fleece, and Athena is there. You can tell it's Athena. She's got the helmet. She's got the aegis with the Gorgon's head. And there's Jason grabbing the fleece. This is interesting because Athena is not in the story as we have it. She is not in the Colchis part of the story. She is only in the part where they're building the ship. Hera sort of helps Jason, in Colchis, and Aphrodite helps Hera help Jason. So Athena's not really in the mix there, but she's in this, and she's in another vase where Jason unsuccessfully goes after the fleece. It should be Medea helping Jason. On the return to Greece, Medea tricks the daughters of Peleus into killing their father. They have to basically hightail it out of town. They go to Corinth. They're there for several years. They have a couple kids who grow up. They're maybe 10 or so. So they've been there about 10 years. And now Jason has a chance to marry Creusa, the princess of Corinth, right? So the king of Corinth, a guy named Creon, basically agrees to that marriage. This will be a chance for Jason to get a throne, which he feels he deserves. And in a sense, he does deserve. But that does mean dumping Medea. And of course, Medea is not happy about that, and she takes vengeance. She ends up killing her two sons. She ends up killing Creusa and the king Creon before she leaves on a flying chariot pulled by flying dragons, and is going to go to Athens, where she will marry the king of Athens, Aegeus, and live with him for about 10 years, 10 or well, no more than that, but maybe like 20 years, until his son Theseus shows up, and then she tries to engineer Theseus's death. And when it turns out who Theseus is, she has to get out of there. But she goes home, back to Colchis, and she's welcomed there. She becomes queen. She rules, into her old age, and then sort of dies in her sleep. So nothing bad really happens to Medea, despite the fact that she's led a pretty bloody life. Oedipus, the chief stuff we know about Oedipus is from Sophocles, but he's not the only source of our information. Sophocles lived in a section of Athens called Colonus. There was a shrine to Oedipus in Colonus. So this is a shrine that Sophocles presumably would have passed pretty much every day of his life. And so for some reason, maybe for that reason, Sophocles really becomes fixated on this guy, Oedipus. The story is that Oedipus was abandoned as a baby by his parents, the king and queen of Thebes, left on a hillside. The shepherd who's supposed to do that takes pity on him and hands him off to another shepherd who is going back to Corinth, and the king and queen of Corinth, who are childless, adopt the baby and raise him. He then gets the information that he is going to kill his father and marry his mother. He's horrified by that idea, and then he flees Corinth and wants to get as far away as possible, figuring that the king of Corinth and the queen, they are his real parents. They're not. And so he ends up encountering an old man on the road to Thebes. The old man is a crotchety old man and beats the crap out of Odysseus for not getting out of his way. Odysseus is on foot. This guy's in a chariot. So he basically beats him with his cane. And Odysseus goes nuts and kills the guy, beats him to death with that same cane. Doesn't realize that it's his father. The ancients probably would not have ordinarily considered that murder. It was a sort of a road rage incident, but the old man, in a sense, provoked it, and so this is just the way things go. They might not be happy about it, but I think there would not ordinarily be a prosecution. But because he killed his father, who is his own blood, now he doesn't know that, that brings pollution on the city of Thebes. When he gets to Thebes, there's a monster, the Sphinx. He solves the riddle of the Sphinx, saves the city. The reward for saving the city is you get to marry the princess, or in this case the queen, because the king has recently died and they're looking for a new king. Now, the sensible thing would be, if you're Oedipus, is don't ever marry someone who's like 15, 16 years older than you, because that person could very well be your mom, right? I mean, if you had that as a rule, this could never happen. But, he's not thinking that through clearly. He's going to be king. He's far away from Corinth, which he thinks is what he has to do to save the people back there. The play Oedipus Tyrannus, sometimes called Oedipus Rex or Oedipus the King, the title is interesting because Tyrannus really means a ruler who has king-like powers but is not the king by birth. But the thing is, Oedipus is the king by birth because he's the son of the previous king. He doesn't know that, so it's a play really about ignorance and discovery. And there's a play on words there. Oedipus Rex loses that play because that just means Oedipus the king, and so there's no pun there. And you can't call it Oedipus the tyrant because that has its own connotations that don't really apply. The play opens, the city of Thebes is suffering under a plague, and Oedipus has sent his brother-in-law Creon to, this is a different Creon, his brother-in-law Creon to Delphi to find out what to do, and he's told that he needs to find the murderer of Laius, the previous king, to save the city. He vows to do so. And it's basically a murder investigation. Now, the audience entirely knows what the story is, but Oedipus doesn't, and he gradually sort of gets closer and closer to the truth, and finally gets to the truth. And it's interesting, when he gets to that last bit of evidence that he needs, he's interrogating a shepherd, the shepherd who handed him over to this other shepherd, and he says, "You need to tell me the story." And he says, "Master, I am on the point of saying something awful and irrevocable." And then Oedipus says, "And I of hearing it, but hear it I must." So he sort of knows that what the answer is going to be, but he has to hear it for sure to make 100% sure that this is the case. And then, of course, his wife Jocasta, who's also his mom, has committed suicide. He then goes in, takes the body down, takes the brooches on the queen's dress, and then gouges his eyes out. He then goes into exile. That's the end of the play. And some people read this, he's a tragic hero. But I've read that play a bunch of times, and I would argue that the way Sophocles presents it, yes, he is a tragic hero. Things end badly for him. But he's a hero, like a hero in our sense of the word. He saves his city. That's his job. That's his duty. That's his pleasure. He does it. And it costs him dearly, and he still does it. So, yes, this other stuff happened, but that was done in ignorance, and that doesn't excuse it necessarily. But in the course of the play itself, he shows himself to be a hero. In the Oedipus of Colonus, this is the last play Sophocles wrote. He wrote it when he was 90 years old. In this play, it deals with Oedipus's mysterious disappearance in Athens. He's arrived in Athens in the area called Colonus. Theseus comes, welcomes him to the city, despite the fact that he supposedly has blood guilt on him. He does not. He's been absolved of that by this point. But Theseus, like he did with Heracles, just says, "No, you're welcome. Here in Athens, we welcome people, and you're a traveler, and we welcome you." And then the two of them go off, and Theseus follows Oedipus. Oedipus sort of goes on his own power. He comes to a cave. He goes into the cave. There's a bright light, and then when Theseus goes into the cave, there's no one there. So he sort of mysteriously disappeared. Now, is Oedipus a homecoming husband? Well, yes, but in an ironic way that actually doesn't really sort of help him. But and the Oedipus of Colonus, some people would argue it is actually Sophocles' greatest play, but it doesn't quite have the power for a modern audience that the Oedipus Tyrannus has. So here we have Oedipus before the Sphinx, right? There's the Sphinx sitting on that little column top, and the riddle that she asks is what goes on 4 at dawn, on 2 at noon, and on 3 in the evening, and the answer is a human being as a baby on all 4s, as an adult male or adult, even female on 2 legs, and then as an old person with a cane. So the excerpt comes from Odysseus from the Odyssey book 10, which tells mainly the story of Odysseus and Circe. The first edition had a selection from book 11 as well. I don't know why Maurizio got rid of it, especially since the Aeneid section deals specifically with the traveling to the underworld. So it seems like she should have kept book 11's part in it, but she did not. But it's still sort of an enjoyable story, what's in book 10. There's a quote from a section of a modern poem by Constantine Cavafy called Ithaca. And it's all about the importance of the journey, right? That you, like the hero in the book you're reading, is on a journey, right? You're on your life's journey. Joseph Campbell, in looking at the hero, he was specifically looking at the quest hero, as was Vladimir Propp. He wrote a work called The Hero with a Thousand Faces in 1949. That made his reputation. That made him sort of world famous. He taught at a small elite women's college called Sarah Lawrence. That for his entire teaching career, that's where he taught. The monomyth is basically the hero story is always the same. And that story is call, you get the call to adventure, you have the adventure, and return. So separation, adventure, return. That's the same also as Van Gennep's schema for ritual, right? Rituals of elevation. And that can be seen as, the way that we go through, right? We have various sort of threshold things we pass through. Now, some people live in the same place their entire life, but of course, even they have changed over time. So and as is the place. So, those things are working on each other. The Star Wars story, of course, is the Joseph Campbell monomyth put into action, because George Lucas was a big fan of The Hero with a Thousand Faces. The monomyth is really culturally specific. This is something you see in stories of the West, of European myths, and it applies to men's journeys, because women don't have journeys in the same way that men do, right? So men actually travel and come home. Women basically are home and stay home. So here is a terracotta piece showing the face of Polyphemus. And we know it's Polyphemus the Cyclops because he has that middle eye, right, which is the tip off. Here's a picture of a very young Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker from Star Wars, what later became known as Episode 4. The scholarship here looks at a piece that W.H. Auden, who was a famous British poet of the 20th century, one of the greatest 20th century poets, he also did some scholarship, and one of the pieces he did was a piece called The Quest Hero, where he looks at the quest hero, and he argues that the reason that the quest stories appeal to people is that people can see themselves in those heroes in a way that they maybe can't see themselves, like as Odysseus, as Achilles. but they can see themselves as Odysseus, right, trying to get home, right? I mean, it even that song, "What if God was one of us," right? Just trying to get home, right? That's the story, just trying to get home, and the reader's subjective experience of their life is like that of a hero on the quest. So that's why he argues. But what he does is he says there are basically 6 like key narrative components in the quest hero story. So it's sort of like the prop 31 things, but of course here it's much more condensed. So there's like an object that you have to go after. The hero goes after it. He has many trials. He ends up successfully completing the trials. He gets the princess, or whatever the reward is. He gets to come home, and he generally gets elevated to kingship. The comparison section looks again at Virgil's Aeneid, and it looks at a section from Book 6. Book 6 almost entirely deals with Odysseus traveling to the underworld, where he is going to meet his father's ghost. His father Anchises had died. He's going to see his ghost in the underworld, and seeing the ghost in the underworld, he is going to he's going to get information. And the information that Aeneas gets is he gets information about Roman history. Rome hasn't been founded yet, but he gets information from Anchises about the future. And so in a sense, he learns about Roman history, even though it hasn't happened yet. And so it's sort of strange, and sadly, Maurizio cuts that part out. I mean, we get the whole thing of him going to the underworld. We don't get that encounter with Anchises that we had in 11. For some reason, she trims that. So there are similarities too and differences from Homer. One is he actually goes to the underworld, and he's of course leaving his home, but he's also going to a new home. So that's a different type of thing from Odysseus. He goes to the underworld with the Sibyl, who's his prophetess. He sees Anchises' ghost, and he sees the ghosts of dead Trojans who are going to become Romans in the future. Right? That's how he sees the Roman history, because they already look like the Romans they're going to be. We get more of the geography of the underworld. He crossed the river Styx. He gets a glimpse of Tartarus, the place of punishment. He has to get a golden bow. This is Fraser's golden bow. That's where it got its title from. That's his ticket to get him across the river Styx. And the excerpt from Book 6 is well worth reading. Actually, Book 6 as a whole is sort of worth reading. It's a lot of fun. So here we have Aeneas carrying his father on his shoulders. We saw that before. This is on a signet ring. And the Nachleben section deals with the African-American Odysseus. So why would the figure of Odysseus appeal to African-American men? One is because African-American had to move around, right? They had to move around to find jobs. They had to move around to, they never really found a home, but they're always on the move. And Odysseus does get home, but he's also a traveling guy. He's also a trickster, and tricksters are very popular with people who don't have power. If you don't have power, then you have to use your smarts to get what you want, right? Because the people with power are going to try to keep you from that, so you have to trick them. The main thing in this section is this poem by Sterling Brown called Odyssey of Big Boy, in which this guy Big Boy recalls his life and all the traveling he had. And he traveled on various trains, and he traveled across very many roads. He went all over the United States, and he found various women and so forth. So he's basically sort of in a way celebrating his life, but there's also some pain in the fact that he never really found a home. Romar Bearden did some illustrations for an edition of the Odyssey where he used African American imagery in his collages. And of course, the one thing that the African American experienced in the 20th century was the Great Migration, where Southern blacks moved to the North, where they thought there would be better opportunities, and there were better opportunities, but it didn't mean that they escaped prejudice and everything else. It was still pretty awful, but there were some opportunities, right? If they made it to Detroit, they'd get a job in the auto, and even if they were not getting paid as well as their white coworkers, and they were not, by the standards of what they had lived in the South, they were much better off. So it's a mixed bag, and that's not to excuse the bad treatment that they suffered. That is still bad treatment, and it's still wrong. Um, their eyes were watching God. The Odysseus figure here is actually a woman, Janie Crawford, who I have a feeling is Zora Neale Hurston wanted to write a work, in a sense, about a hero who was like her. And so she has sort of a shapeshifter quality. She refused to be bound by the norms of society.